This is English shorthand dictation number 179 and the dictation speed is 160 words per minute. Ready? Start. Sir, my submission is that the future of political parties in India will be so constituted that they will be divided on religious lines and not on the lines of political or economic differences. As I view the situation, it seems to me that in the future constitution of India, the executive will be so divided that we shall see less of the religious and racial distinctions coming to the surface, and we shall find a Hindu minister having a party and a following containing a large element of Muslims, and a Muslim minister with a following of Hindus in his group. If that happens, I do not understand how a Hindu minister who is in charge of law and order could administer law and order in such a manner as to offend the susceptibilities of a part of the group which supports him in office. It seems to me, therefore, that the fears so far as this particular aspect of the matter is concerned are rather unfounded. The second thing which seems to be agreed upon more or less is that not only should the executive be a unified executive, but that the responsibility of this unified executive should be joint and not several. I agree with these conclusions, but the points of difference that have arisen in the course of the debate to which we have listened largely relate to the composition of the executive, and it seems to me that there arise three different questions for our consideration in connection with the composition of the executive. The first question is, should the executive be confined to members of the legislature, or should it be open to individuals who are officials or non-officials and who are outside the legislature? The second question is, should it consist of members of the minority communities? The third question is whether the governor should have the responsibility of appointing the ministers himself, or whether he should appoint the chief minister and leave the matter of the selection of his colleagues to that chief minister. Sir, on all these three questions, my answer is in affirmative. Personally, I do not see why the membership of the cabinet should be rigorously restricted and confined to the members of the legislature. I also do not see why there should not exist some provisions whereby the executive should not be made as representative as possible of all the communities that are represented in the legislature. Thirdly, regarding the power of the governor to compose his ministry, it seems to me that we must admit that it is his prerogative to constitute the ministry, and that you must have discretion left to him in the matter of selecting his men. But sir, when I say that I answer these three questions in the affirmative, I make them subject to one supreme condition. That supreme condition is that however the executive is composed, it shall abide by one principle, namely that it shall accept joint responsibility. For instance, if this principle of joint responsibility is made obligatory upon the executive, it seems to me that the importation of a foreign element into the cabinet will not be a disturbing factor as it is supposed to be. If the newcomer who does not belong to the legislative council comes into the cabinet and accepts joint responsibility along with the cabinet, I do not see any reason why such a procedure should not be permitted. It was pointed out that it may so happen that when a ministry is censored and it goes out, the official or the one who does not belong to the legislature will remain while the other members of the cabinet will go out, and that when a new ministry is formed, he will be again tagged on to the ministry, and that he will be perpetually in the council. It seems to me, with all respects, that that is a somewhat fallacious view, because unless the members who are drawn from the legislature to form the ministry are prepared to take him along with them and are prepared to bear the responsibility of his actions, they will not consent to work when he accepts their advice and they accept his advice. For instance, if a prime minister were so situated that he could safely take an outsider into his cabinet and at the same time maintain the confidence of the house, I do not see why the chief minister should be prevented from having that privilege accorded to him. In the same way, if it was found possible that the governor should have powers to see that the different minority communities are represented in his cabinet, and if at the same time it is made perfectly clear that whoever is appointed to the cabinet must accept joint responsibility with the others, then I submit there is no harm in allowing this sort of thing. It seems to me, therefore, that the point which it is necessary to emphasize is that the governor may have the power which belongs to him as of right to compose the ministry in any way he likes, provided that the ministry works on the principle of joint responsibility. Now the next question to which I will address myself is how best to achieve this result, how best to bring out a responsible and unified executive. It seems to me there are two ways open to us. One way is to define in the Constitution itself the character of the executive by law. The other is to leave to convention the constitution of the executive. Both these ways are adopted, as you all know. We all know that in the dominions of Canada, South Africa and Australia, responsible government of a unified character is entirely a matter of convention. Every one of us knows that in the Canadian Act or in the acts of South Africa or Australia, the words responsible government do not arise. It is not even mentioned in the Canadian Act that the ministers who are to advise the governor are to be members of the legislature, although as a matter of fact they are. On the other hand, in the constitutions of Ireland, Malta and Rhodesia, this is a subject which is not left to convention. It is something which is incorporated in law. In Ireland, we know that the Prime Minister is a creature of statute. The joint responsibility is also defined by law. I therefore think that we shall have to make our choice between the two, and in making the choice, I for one would be guided by two considerations. I fully realize that when a matter is left to convention, it is possible that the convention may be wrongly worked, that it may be abused, and may be abused with impunity. The danger of matters being left to convention in a country like India seems to me to be greater because there are no parties in India which have a keen eye on the way in which the constitution works, and we may have ministers less interested in working the constitution in the right spirit than in maintaining their seats in the cabinet. On the other hand, it seems to me that where matters are defined by law, it must necessarily take away all the discretion that must necessarily be left to a governor. In a country like India, where the political field with all its communal and racial difficulties is an absolutely uncharted sea, it seems to me that we must so contrive that sufficient discretion will be left with the governor. My concrete suggestion, therefore, is that joint responsibility of the executive should be prescribed by law, and that everything else should be left to the discretion of the governor, so that we shall have satisfied both the conditions. We shall have provided that whatever responsibility there is, it is a joint responsibility, and that the composition of the executive is at the same time not hampered in such a manner that the communities which do require to be represented in the cabinet may be represented, or that the necessity which Prime Minister may feel of having a non-official or an outsider in his cabinet is provided for. If we do that, if we insist by law, not leaving it to the discretion of the governor, I think all other matters may be left without any fear of abuse to the choice of the governor. Sir, the next topic which I will take for consideration is that of the powers of the governor vis-a-vis his executive. As we know, the present relations between the governor and the ministers are defined in section 52 of sub-clause 3. That clause says that in all transferred matters, the governor shall be guided by the advice of his ministers, and it adds a further proviso that if he sees sufficient cause to dissent from the advice of his ministers, he may cause action to be taken otherwise than in accordance with that advice. With all due respect to those who framed that clause, I cannot help saying that this clause as it now stands is a perversion of responsible government. It makes responsible government a matter of convenience, a matter which may be accepted and followed when it suits the governor, whereas as a matter of fact, what we want is that responsible government should be a matter of obligation. If responsible government means anything, it means that in whatever action the governor takes in any field, he has the support of a ministry which has the confidence of the House.